Perfect. Well, just some quick housekeeping as we jump into things. Want to have this be as helpful as possible for you. And Simona, good to see you from the Netherlands. Honorary delegate from Italy, we'll call you also. So as you were alerted, I mean, we are recording this session, and there's several people who couldn't make it, and we want this to be available for people. Bryce is the co-host, so he's watching the chat and managing time. My presentation will be about 15-20 minutes, and hopefully we'll hold it to that. Last time I ran over a bit, but this is an active question and answer. So if there's at any point you have a question, feel free, you have my permission to unmute yourself and interrupt me and ask your question. Most likely, if you have a question, someone else does. And this is about how do we help our community here? Because at the end of the day, what I really see our role as is how do we help be a catalyst for success for the impact ecosystem. And the way that we're doing that is through inspiring better storytelling for all of you, so that we can affect more of that change that we want to in the world. So with that, let's jump into, I mean, the things that we're wanting to cover is just how do you actually affordably share your story with exponentially more frequency and leverage the gold mine of your existing efforts, as well as create community that also creates content for you. So I love this quote. It's that if you want to change the world, you need to change your story. And so a lot of our focus has been through the years of helping organizations improve the caliber of their storytelling. This is actually going to be a bit different. So I'm going to modify this quote a little bit. If you want to change the world, you need to change the frequency of your story. And we're going to dive into why and what that's, how to go about that. One of the challenges of any kind of messaging, it really falls into this curve of forgetting. So no matter how powerful or potent that story is, there's this decay curve that by day 16, if you can see that 95% of what your audience heard, they've already forgotten. So that can be deflating somewhat, but the antidote for that is really the curve of remembering that through frequency.
Hi, this is
Julianne.
I'm calling back.
Yeah. Okay. That the way that we counteract the curve of forgetting is actually the curve of remembering with increasing frequency. And in advertising, the mantra is somewhat that someone doesn't realize they've seen your ad till they've seen it 8 times, right? It's this this idea of exposure, but how do you do it in a way that also isn't just beating a dead horse or sending the same story out multiple times? It's not about just blasting the same thing. It's how do you have that core story repeated in such a way that it builds. I mean, there's this idea of frequency breeds familiarity, and really familiarity breeds trust. And especially in the impact space, especially as we talk about fundraising and attracting capital, trust is at the heart of all that. How do we get people to trust us, and that this crazy idea that we've come up with is actually doesn't sound that risky? It's through exposure therapy with your message that you have to expose your audience to it multiple times. So this poses some interesting challenges, though, because showing up consistently with enough frequency can be very expensive. I mean, it can be time consuming, take a lot of your bandwidth. If you're not careful, if it's not organized, it can just be spreading a lot more noise out into the system if it's not organized and cohesive. And I would say that this is a problem that isn't just going to go away. If anything, this trend is probably going to accelerate. So one of the things that that sort of like sparked some of this conversation is we've really focused in on sort of hero content, top, like really high end, more high touch kind of manifesto films or fundraising, fundraising films that that are sort of a one-off and one and done kind of piece. But we're seeing far more that that there's a growing need that that typical model hasn't been servicing. We just recently finished a great corporate image film for an impact organization in Western Europe, and they loved it. It was well received. It got their audience to become tearful. It was just exactly what we wanted. And practically the next day they said, that was great. Now, how do we show up on LinkedIn every single day? And we're like, well, years ago, we would have said, we don't solve that problem. We don't have an answer. We don't know how to do that. And because it's not realistic to go make, a large scale film every single day for your organization to communicate your idea. But COVID really forced us, as it did all of us, to adapt and innovate. And we couldn't get on a plane anymore to go gather stories of impact from all over the world. And so we really had to get good at leaning on our partners and collaborating with other content creators in various countries. And part of what we had to figure out was, how do we make those, directions and instructions really clear and easy to follow, so that anyone anywhere could generate content that fits the standard that we're after. And so our previous Q&As and webinars have really been about, hey, we're distilling our 20 years of expertise in storytelling, and we're communicating this. And so we're coming from, hey, this is the tried and true method. This one's a little different. What we're sharing today is really more of a work in progress. And we're somewhat showing you what we're baking in the lab right now, if you will. And so part of this is also just, how do we, with our commitment to the impact ecosystem, how are we sharing what we're learning and also learning from each other? So some of this is going to be, hey, this is what we've tested, and let's see, let's see how things prove out further. So, yeah. So with all this, if we could take that company's question of, okay, that's great, you made one great film for us, but how do we show up more consistently, more frequently? How do we get this story out, if you will, every single day? And so that realistically, can we afford that? How can we have the bandwidth and the manpower to do that? And how is this all going to be pointing in the right direction, so that we're not just confusing our audience or just putting out crap that no one really wants to see? And so one of the things that we started with was, okay, let's audit what they're currently doing to mine existing efforts. So for this impact organization, they spoke at dozens of events each year, and none of it's recorded, and there's no record of that. They're speaking to a small group of people. How can we better leverage that? They put out an impact report that a few dozen people download, but their 100+ page document, nobody ever really sees. And there's story snippets that could be mined in that. They put on community events that nobody really knows about, or that their broader community isn't aware of. they put out an hour-long podcast and they make one post on LinkedIn to say, hey, download the podcast. But in that hour, there's 20 little sound bites of 30 seconds that that we can mine and pull out and share in a snackable way on social media that someone could listen to and post. So I think there's blog posts and longer form video. It's really looking, what are you already doing that doesn't have to create more effort, but how can we atomize that into so that more people can benefit from it, and it can be a reminder that's of the story and the message that you're doing. And so this is an exercise to maybe just take a quick pause and think about, okay, what are the things I'm already doing that I'm having to repeat, or that, you know, other people could benefit from what I'm having to say. Now, you might not be able to record every time you pitch to an investor, but, you know, if you ask ahead of time and just say, hey, this is helping me to get better, and also there's ways that I'm describing this that is going to be useful for other people to think of, or from a customer service standpoint of like, what are the questions that come up that you're answering over and over again. So this one is really the low-hanging fruit, the mining existing efforts. And the second phase is really what we have had to develop through COVID. And but imagine you've got an army of Uber drivers, but they're not really driving a vehicle. They're actually using their mobile phone to gather content for you. Some of the hurdles with that is making sure they know what to say, who's going to create it, how do you get them to want to make it for you, and how do you ensure the content is stuff that you can use, and then gathering it all up. And so we did a test of this, and we can walk through this later of like how to overcome these challenges. But with the GIIN for their investor forum, we had to gather stories from 12 different social entrepreneurs in 12 countries, and they're non-professionals in terms of the, you know, filmmaking is not their profession. They're trying to start, you know, they're entrepreneurs focused on that. But we had to make what we call bulletproof instructions, both like a technical, how to set up your cell phone. Here's each shot that needs to be collected. This is how you're going to do it. And this is what we need from it. So trying to reduce all of the room for interpretation and making it what we say is really like bulletproof. But we were pleased as we, you know, had these non-professionals on their cell phones recording content that's all supposed to stitch together seamlessly. And it came together quite nice. I mean, so each of these shots, and this is just one segment, we had them all match cut. So they all had to line up perfectly for this effect to work. And, you know, suddenly we're tapping into, you know, this is a small little test, but we were able to gather content that fits seamlessly together and works to help communicate a broader story. And so we won't watch the finished film here, happy to share it out, but it came together well and was really well received at the GIIN Investor Forum. I'm in front of 1,500 impact investors. So we have a few examples of how we've been testing this concept of there's a startup that's reducing the carbon footprint of heat cables by 92%, and like taking their content and cutting into small bits. And then also while we're there, like how do we leverage this for more social content and getting the talent to also do social pieces. Or there's a local auto tech group that has 24 locations, and getting covering their community events and creating social content from one event can now create weeks worth of content. So the last thing I'm going to share is just, okay, I'm anticipating, you know, in my own head, I'm like, okay, well, maybe this just works for yeah, this is consumer brands, or this is like, we're different. We're in the, financial sector. We've, our customers are, they're not on TikTok, and this isn't. And I think, so one of the things, this isn't our own success story. This is a third party situation, but I found it interesting the way that they approached it. So Capco is a financial services industry and organization headquartered in the UK, specializing in driving digital transformation with 32 offices across Asia, Europe, and North America. One of the things they did is actually leveraging their employee base to create authentic content, and turned into social media into an engine for talent acquisition and lead generation. So they tested this against their current advertising efforts. So the conversion rate for paid ads was 3.14%, while employee generated content was 51.71% conversion rate. And incredible, unheard of sort of like difference. And their paid ads, their lead forms, instead of 1 to 2%, were getting filled out at 20 to 30%. So the marketing director at Capco, I love this quote, that people don't want to engage with brands as much as they used to. People want to talk to people, and a recommendation comes stronger from a friend over a connection, or a connection over a brand. So in a way, how do we leverage our communities to help create content that that can help reinforce our story, but also it's building a stronger connection with our community as they're part of helping tell our story. So that's the whirlwind fire hose that we can go into more depth and ask the questions that you want, but I want to sort of cover the high level through. And so let's jump into, yeah, what questions do you have right off the bat that we've already, like, anything we want to drill down in more detail? Bryce, were there any questions in the chat?
None in the chat right now.
Okay, awesome. So one of the things I wanted to have this be maybe a little bit more practical situation exercise. So if anyone's willing to be a guinea pig, let's actually, if you want to unmute and just say, like, be willing to share sort of like, let's see if we can apply these principles or these ideas of how would you do this yourself? How would you leverage your own community to help create content, a content creation engine for yourself? And we'll look at auditing your current activities and which allies can we find in your network, and then how do we create the right incentives to get them to create content for you. So any brave soul out there that's willing to be, like, for us to workshop their idea?
I can be one if you want one.
Yeah. Why don't you give us like a 30-second just overview of what you're working on, Thomas?
Yeah. So great storytelling, by the way. We try to we just launched a click and collect marketplace Christmas last year, and we rate products according to sustainability. So we want to get as many people as possible to buy tomato A or tomato B inside the tomato category, inside the tuna fish category, so that we can get them to compound competition over time. So like, or let's get a solar panel, or let's get windmills until they get to zero emissions or even negative emissions. That, I believe, is the biggest way to move the most money the fastest to the more sustainable value chains. And that can have transformational effect. And the way we do that is we outsource the life cycle assessment in small micro jobs to the end shoppers. That makes us very different from others because we basically have an infinite data gathering capacity. We can take the entire world in 2 years, actually. It's totally crazy to say this, but that's possible.
Oh, awesome. So what sort of is the storytelling hurdle in that, like if you could leverage your, let's start with like auditing your current activities. Where are you already sharing your story? Where are you already communicating these ideas? Without thinking of how we translate that into additional content, but where are those things currently for your organization?
We are sharing on Not so much right now, but we are planning a lot of sharing on LinkedIn, and no, actually TikTok and Snapchat, because that's where our younger audience is, and we want to reach them first. But also Facebook and Instagram.
Okay. And you may not right now, even if you have no social media presence, I don't think this only can apply to social media. So, but I think that's where the conversations are being held right now. That's where influence is being wielded. And I think if we're, as impact organizations, we're trying to shift the world and change paradigms, I think we're remiss if we don't show up. You know, like I think we could play it safe and not be there, but if there's chance to influence, you know, perceptions and people, like I think we need to consider how do we engage there. That being said, so right now you are sharing your story. It may not be currently on social media. Where are the places though that you're having to? I mean, you're repeating your story dozens of times every week, right? You're talking. I mean, what are some of those touch points where you're communicating?
Yeah, we can latch on to existing stories about climate change and say, for example, just in a comment, it's time to act, and then link to our download app link potentially. And we can also write why. Let's shift some cash, or let's shift some money. Let's see how much money we can shift together. With collaboration, we can do everything. And yeah. But of course, I also believe that the strongest factor for growth, and that's, I've heard many people say that, best practice is to actually build this into the app as the invite, basically growth hacking built into the app, where you can invite friends and get points and recognition if you do invite others. And that's but we need to kickstart it somewhere, right? So we need to get the story out there to people in the Instagram and everywhere else. But eventually they will end up in the app, and in the app will then repeat again, I guess, in small bites throughout the app, where we try to incentivize them to invite their friends and add products to the platform and things like that.
Okay. So if we're looking at where, like right now, you're the way that you're communicating your story right now is mainly you in person talking to potential investors, potential partners, potential volunteers.
Yeah, so very focused on investors right now.
Yeah. And so are there spaces or times where that one message can be captured or shared in broader ways?
The message to the investors.
Yeah, I mean, if on your side, you know, because you know you are articulating it, you know, you're communicating that idea, and like imagine if a great example of kind of doing this, if any of you follow Gary Vee, I mean, their organization does this all the time. Anytime he speaks to anybody, they record it, they break it into little sound bites and share it, repost it on social media. That's somewhat, you know, like his MO, and that's somewhat like a different situation that you know, like if you're going to have him come speak to your organization, you know that he has the rights to repurpose that. But if you think of, you know, like the way that you communicate that idea, like of you know, pitching it to investors, or like there's probably little nuggets of that can help like help pique interest, and once again, it's building familiarity with your idea over time so that they see that and are exposed to it. You know, if you think about who are the, you know, you're focusing on investors, and also then, you know, the community of you know, people gathering the data for your stuff to work, you know, and what are ways that you can, you know, both so you first off, I mean, this is a very parallel kind of conversation, right? Of distributive, you're just doing distributive data collection, and we're talking about distributive story gathering,
Yeah.
But are the ways that also you could build into the model as they're gathering, like about Tomato B, the story, that there's a gamified way to say, oh, and I'm sharing this and I got 24 likes, or, like 57 more people saw because I shared about my action here, and that it's inherently documenting and storytelling around what people are doing, that this idea of data gathering is also shared, and it's like that people become more familiar with the idea as more of their friends and more of the community is talking about this process. So when they're presented with that, it doesn't sound so foreign, right? That they've been inoculated by it because they've seen this in a number of places. So
Yeah, right. So that's a good idea to maybe either have them record as they use the app, or record some, maybe they gathered a piece of a product data point, and they could have a badge and they could share that. Is that what you're thinking, or is it you're thinking more like?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there, with all of this, is just maybe a question, like a hypothetical of just like, how do I 10x what I'm sharing? How do I 10x the story that I'm sharing, and without a 10x increase of time and effort and cost? And like, so maybe there's a way that, like that in micro stories is also shared as you're doing micro data gathering.
Yeah. Nice.
So, and something to chew on. And I don't know if that was helpful, or like,
that was a very good idea.
Unique situation, but yeah. And anyone else that's brave enough to maybe chew on, or what is there any part of this that maybe isn't making sense or clicking? And let's dig into that, because I think part of this is we're all on the same learning journey. We're just a little bit further down the learning curve, but we don't have all the answers. And so, I think part of the principle of this too is like collectively we're smarter altogether than we are just alone, but any thoughts on what your organization is doing, and how can you 10x the frequency of your storytelling without, like at cost neutral or minimal additional cost, or like, but like disproportionately scale your storytelling? How might you do that in what you're doing right now? Let's see. Anyone brave enough to jump in, and we can workshop their idea?
I don't mind.
Okay. So Benjamin, tell us quickly about what, for the rest of us, what you're working on, where you're at.
Well, let me share my video, I guess. So I've been doing impact investing a long time on a small scale with friends and family, and I'm trying to scale now by acquiring an impact banking deposit company that's very large. It's called Impact Deposits Corp, and they have billions that they've managed. We're well under 100 million. So scale is an issue, and we want to be reaching philanthropists and impact investors who have a lot of money sitting in cash that they need to be liquid. And we have a lot of different ways of making that cash actually make a difference. from a bond ladder in microfinance to carbon trading to ESG hedge funds that we manage. So, and also the Impact Deposits Corp, which has its own philanthropic side. So it's a complicated story that I'm trying to figure out also with Issimo to how to make this a coordinated story. And I can't really put it out there fully until we have acquired impact deposits. So currently we're looking for a few very close aligned parties to acquire impact deposits with us and then create a holding company for impact.
What country is this bank in?
It's in the US. It's not a
Okay.
bank. It's actually what it does is it divides large amounts of money into $250,000 lots in community banks. So it not only gets used for Main Street lending in community banks, but it's also a portion of the fees go back to the bank for philanthropy. So in the last few years, that company has been very profitable, but has also given away 12 million and started 70 nonprofits in Miami. That's where the founder is located. That's Bill Burdett. It's a UNPRI approved. It's the only deposit cash management that's approved on UNPRI.
No, and it's a I think it's a lovely model, but there's so many like people wanting to do impact and having to have their money, their cash sit somewhere in between cash calls or other things that while it's sitting there waiting, it can also be doing good and driving impact. And they have kind of a unique approach for that, which I think is beautiful. So if there is a way to get that story out exponentially more frequently to the right people, and if you're only doing it, like it doesn't have to be like a crazy amount, but how do you get that out more frequently and more effectively? What might that look like? So, like, do you want to investigate like, okay, getting those handful of close partners that can help buy impact deposits, or after that and talk about the broader story once that happens, which would be more useful for you to explore?
I think after, at least for now, because we have a circle of really interesting prospects, and I want to hopefully bring that to a close in the next few weeks, and then it would be a different story depending on who the partners are, because they'll all have a part in the holding company. So I don't think I can really promote the story too much, but for, until it goes through. And then I think all of these parties that would participate would have their own circle of people that they're already marketing to. So it becomes a much broader, market, I think. And the thing that I think I need most help in is really focusing this story. And I believe I'm at the point where I think the best story, the simplest story, is what you just outlined, the managing of liquidity for people who are waiting for capital calls in private equity or venture, or foundations that have put out an RFP and are have to set aside money that they're going to put to work after they get proposals. So there's a lot of money that's just sitting idle, and not to mention the $1 trillion in corporations that are in the US anyway. There's estimated over $1 trillion sitting in cash. And you know, there's so much good that can be done in shorter periods of time.
Yeah. And I think your story is really interesting too, because of the different stakeholders involved. So you have those with the capital that are have cash that can go towards impact. You have the regional banks that are receiving it, you know, FDI insured, and that are benefiting it. And also there's those on Main Street, the you know, small businesses that are able to receive loans backed from that. And then also the stories of, you know, the philanthropic side of where those donations go.
Mhm.
And so like on each of those tiers, you suddenly have these pools of people in your community that have a vested interest in your success. And I think one of the things to maybe look at is how do you craft the right value exchange that it makes sense for them, that they want to create, they want their stories to be shared and gathered. And there might be situations where that isn't always possible or appropriate, or but I think the more that you can have this idea of you know, your deposits going towards impact, and that we're building familiarity and trust, you know, so that now someone waiting for their capital call with, you know, millions of dollars sitting around is like, okay, this totally makes sense. So if, you know, the starting at the bottom, I mean, those that are benefiting from the philanthropic donations, you know, of, you know, like the part of that, you know, like that they can talk about, like, share a story of what they've done, or what the impact they've been able to do, or the good that they've done, or the small businesses that you know, like, have been featured. So for example, like when we did the project for the GIIN and had those 12 entrepreneurs, part of the value exchange, the incentive for them to create the content for us, was that they wanted to be featured in front of the 1,500 impact investors at the GIIN Investor Forum. You know, and for the auto mechanic store, like having stores compete against each other, and like that there's a natural competition for who wants to be seen as, you know, leading and on the leaderboard and gamifying that, and that you know, could be a way to incentivize. There might also be you know, is there a way to financially reward and in the right way? But you do have like some, I think, some powerful stories to be collected of, and their peers of other people that have, hey, you know, like, I'm an impact investor and I hadn't even thought about what my cash is doing sitting around, and knowing that it's like touching multiple lives in this value chain, and that now we're doing all of our, you know, all of our cash that's sitting around is going to be applied this way, speaking peer-to-peer. And, you know, what the question would be, what is it that they want? What do they intrinsically want? And then how do you arrange to help them get more of what they want? You know, like, and so I think on any of those, there's some powerful stories to mine and to leverage, and to not let those just, you might see all of them, but the market is probably invisible to them. But like, I can envision, you know, hundreds of stories that are generated because of, hey, this impact, this investment, and where it goes. And so some of the nuances we can discuss and maybe explore how to.
Yeah, I have a question in relation to that might be interesting to everyone. And that is, when you have complexity and you have a lot of interesting stories, what I've found in the past was with my presentations to people, after a while, they kind of glaze over if they hear one story after another. They can't have the heart to really take it all in. And so I'm wondering how you manage that, you know, in terms of the repeating of stories, whether it's better to have one story that you repeat over and over, because like he said, most people forget after a certain number of days anyway, or do you have a new story over, so that each time it's a new story, but then they
Yeah.
forget that,
Yeah,
just
well,
trying to
that's
get a
a
sense.
yeah, well, that's a wonderful question. I do think, yeah, you don't want to play the same note over and over again. I don't think the same story, exact same embodiment of that story. But if you think of like the George Seurat, the famous pointillist, artist, and like each of those dots is
Mhm.
just a single point, but taken collective, it's painting a beautiful picture and it's telling a unified story. So they're different expressions of the same idea or pointing you in the same direction. But I think that's part of why the need for fresh content is so important. Yeah, you can't just repost the same comment or video 50 times and think you're doing the same job. What's more effective is, okay, you have that core story, but each of these different iterations of that or embodiments of, hey, there's a new person that was benefited in Miami because of your investment, your deposit. And the next week it's someone else's story. It's still saying your investment is going towards and benefiting people, but this person has an entirely different situation and speaking from their story. So it's the same point, but taking a slightly different angle that's reinforcing it, and it's also over a period of time, right? So it's not all at once. I don't know if that actually answered your question, but
Yeah, it did. I think it's good. The other aspect that I didn't mention is that we do want to move into, some of the partners we're talking to are very experienced in crowdfunding. So the whole democratization of the impact space is something we'd like to explore more, to make it possible for people, for example, to own real estate. When you talk to wealthy people, they all say, when you ask them what they invest in, it's always real estate. But people without very much money have a hard time really doing that. And so some of our partners are active in that space. And that would mean also telling the stories, more generally appealing way than just to appeal to family offices and foundations, I would think.
yeah, and it can be versioning. So there might be a version that is really specific for family offices and one that's for the general audience. But the core story is 85% the same, but you have a sort of a targeted way to distribute that story. Awesome. Do we
Thank you very much.
yeah.
Jacob, Lacey had a question that was kind of similar to what you're talking about. You're talking about, value exchange for the people who are helping create content, but is there anything else or other things when you're considering compensation for people contributing content? Like how does that work, or how can that work?
Yeah, if there's a situation where there isn't some intrinsic benefit or just exposure, so one of the groups we talked about, we just have a flat fee that is for a content creator. That might be a high school kid who happens to be pretty talented on Instagram and can record video or get audio recordings, or someone in developing country. We have the model that we're currently running, and you can tweak your own, but we have a $50 per clip that's used, and anything that's submitted that meets the specifications, but the client doesn't end up choosing, still gets compensated $10. And so for someone, that college kid, or when COP27 was happening in Egypt, we decided to see, could we find somebody there that, and that would this incentive work for us? So I found a journalist student from Nairobi that was there at COP27 and had been recording video. And I messaged him and said, hey, we'd love some shots. And we'd pay $50 per these specific clips that we were looking for. It's like, that's awesome. That's amazing. You could do them in 20 minutes. And for him, that was a great, value, but also for us of like, hey, we don't have to get on a plane and go to Egypt. We don't have to hire a local crew. And so you may find, there's a different price point or different tier, but, we're running with that particular compensation model when there's, like, it's just someone maybe less tied to the organization that doesn't have maybe another intrinsic connection, that they'd want to help with telling the story there. I do, and some of it, we can run through a few other questions. I do want to just bring up, like, one of the things that we're putting out there is, like, we're looking for 3 other beta testers for our storytelling at scale. So if you think you might be a good candidate, if you'd like to be considered, go ahead and message me, and we're picking just 3 though that I'm going to run some more tests on, and then also share what's working and how we can, amplify what you're doing with, 10xing your storytelling frequency and building more familiarity and more trust with your network. So awesome. Yeah.
I also added to the chat a link where, if you're interested in that, you can click on that link and pick a time in our calendar.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, any other questions, any parts that wondering about how it might apply to what you're doing, or how we can brainstorm a workshop, or we're here for I guess helping you try to do this yourself, and so we can advance all of the impact efforts that we're trying to do as an collectively as a an industry. So
hi Jacob, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. It's a little soft, but yeah.
Okay,
Good to hear you, Ben.
let me see if this works better.
Yeah.
So my question would be, what when you are covering different sectors, because we cover different sectors. So for example, on one side, our audience is the sovereign funds of the Nordics or pension funds. On other side, our focus is on the SMEs, the small and medium enterprises. So we are out in the market, we know it, but still it is very difficult to give the same story, the same message to 2 very, very different variable customer segment.
Yeah. I mean, and tell me what you're currently doing to address those 2 different
So we
unique
are
segments.
the largest group of impact investors in Europe, and we are always seeking businesses to support. Financially, we invest in businesses. We have been doing it more than a couple of decades all around the world. But on one side, it is very difficult to find businesses who fulfill our criteria, who fulfill the quality and everything that we are seeking. On other side, we are also presenting, because to the governments, regulatory boards, but also mainly to the major financial institutions, the funds and businesses to invest in. So so both of them are basically our segment.
Yeah. I mean, and if I can feed that back to you, if I'm understanding, like, you have 2 different segments that maybe have different needs, different storytelling needs, and how do you tell a story to serve both? Is that
exactly? I mean, one thing that helps is that the social media, luckily, is not that much touched by the larger segment. They are not really looking into Facebooks and LinkedIn and all that. It is generally for the second segment, for the SMEs. They are very much active in the social media, but not the big ones. So that helps us, but this is just an indirect help we get, but it is not a strategic or structural solution.
Yeah. I mean, so I'll address a couple of the questions that are kind of wrapped into that. I mean, anytime that you have a message that in audience segments that have a different core emotional need. So it's not just like, at the end of the day, what is driving them to take action is sparked by a different set of drivers. So when there's a disparate core emotional needs that you're trying to speak to, of like what you're going to do for them and what they want and how you can help them get what they want, then you're going to need to segment your story and have different potential messaging for those different groups. And that can get, like you said, that can get complicated if you have one big space that you're sharing everything from. But the more that you can have, the most powerful message is if I'm speaking directly to Simona, for example, I'm addressing everything to her one-on-one, but it's personalized, and everything's tailored exactly for their experience. And the more that you can make it feel like your audience is that you know them and their needs so well that it's as if you're having a direct conversation with them, like you know what their pain points are. And so the more that you have to water that down or try to speak to everybody, then no one feels spoken to. No one feels like they're like, oh, you get me. That's exactly what I needed to hear. And how did you know that I feel that? Because so that gets, I'm not saying that a message couldn't have an umbrella and speak to multiple people, but the more disparate those are, the more that they're pulling in different directions, the more I would recommend you have different stories that you're sharing to those segments. Is that making sense? Or sorry, I think you're muted.
No, that completely
Okay.
makes sense. Only it is very complex. It's very resource, how do you call it? Expensive to have two absolute different set of communication going out from the same entity.
If I may add, in my experience,
Please.
that's exactly the case.
Yeah, tell me a bit more about that, Angelica.
Yeah, if you're speaking to different sectors or different people that have different roles, the story needs to change to make them understand what you're trying to say. For example, in my work, I was describing for 6 years ago what ESG and what impact was and the differences and what was, the predictions of business coming forward. So I'm a business strategist. And depending on who I was talking to, which role they were in, if it was the CFO, the treasurer, or the CEO, or the business, or the sales, or the client relationship, that story would change to make them embrace the idea of having those aspects in their business. Does that make sense? And it is expensive, yes. It takes a lot of energy, yes. But maybe that's what we're talking about here. The high frequency that we put out there to scale this. And in my case, I think I scaled the idea because I was one of the drivers, right? Together with a lot of other people to make this happen.
Thank you, Angelica. I think that's really well said. To your comment, Ben, what I would say is, so there's a way though that maybe there's 85% of that story that is the same. The core of what your organization does is, there's overlap, and
yes,
you might be able to, though that 15% is how do you contextualize it for that audience so that it feels like you're speaking directly to them.
That's correct.
So, hey, we have this, if it's one event, but you're inviting two different groups, they might come for very different reasons. The core of the event might be the same, but so contextualizing and so, Gary Vee, don't love everything he does, but there's things that he spells out that I think is really powerful of like, hey, there might be the same piece of story, but it might be geo-targeted and it's like, hey, Philadelphia, you might be, and that same thing might be shown, sent to somebody in Amsterdam. And it's like, hey, Amsterdam, like the tag, text or a sort of segment before, but then the core of it is similar. Or you might need, hey, the invite or the call to action might be different. And and to be fair, there's probably situations where it's an entirely different story. But I would suggest or explore, like, if you have a Venn diagram, where are the overlaps and how do you keep that center of it that's the same, as streamlined as possible, or like as unified as possible, and then giving context and applying it to your different audiences in a way that they feel seen and heard and spoken directly to. So, but it's easier said than done. Yeah.
No, but it's perfect, Jacob. That's exactly it. So the current market are already splitting that matrix at the moment. So if you take an example of the ones that are responsible for ESG reporting in the companies, I'm talking about large companies, for example, or financial players, and the ones that are trying to integrate that in the business. You see, those are two different focuses in this matrix. And I've picked one, for example, to continue to drive, and it's the business side, which is a different story. But you're right, there are similarities to 85%. Yes, let's explore that. I believe it is like that. Yes.
Fantastic. I want to thank everybody who's come, and if you have further questions and that were sparked or just shy, like, don't hesitate to pepper me. And we're on this learning journey together. And I think the takeaway, though, is like, there is a way that you can scale the frequency of your story. You can leverage your community to help be a content creation engine. And you're probably already doing a lot of things that you can better leverage and to get that story out with the frequency that's going to build greater trust. So would love to hear, especially if you have questions, or you try this out, or you've seen other examples of where this is working or what's not. I'd love to continue to send over what you find or what your results are. So and we'll report back too. So any last things before we let you go? If not, I wish you a wonderful day wherever in the world you're at, and keep up the good that you're doing. We really see our job as just to be sort of the megaphone for the good you guys are doing in the world, and we want to help broadcast that and make that a louder voice so that we can help shift more capital flows towards impact. And thanks for all you do. Appreciate you. And
Great.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
ciao.
Much. Bye.
God avond.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Buonasera.
Thanks so
Bye.
much.
Hej då.
Ja.
Hey, though.